of February. I'm Larry Spencer, and I'm part of the faculty staff, retired faculty staff, 150th anniversary committee, and we are videotaping various faculty and staff. And today we have Bill Taffe. So Bill, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you.
And we start off with the first question that we usually ask is, when did you come here, and what was your position when you came?
Yeah, I came in 1971 as an assistant professor in the science department.
Okay, and what was your sort of teaching duties when you came here at that time?
Mostly physics.
Okay, sort of introductory and advanced physics. So, and what was your impression of the students when you came here? I know you were at a private college in Maine and you were dorm parents. What kind of transition was that to come here to Plymouth?
Well, there's real cultural difference. And that took a while to get used to. The students, I found I had some very good students. I was surprised at how good they were. But so it wasn't, I didn't have any negative reaction to the student body that we were working with, but there were some cultural things within the institution that were a little difficult.
So what was your, I guess you were, in a fairly large town in Maine, and you came to a fairly small town in New Hampshire. What was your impression of Plymouth at that time?
Well, I live in Rumney, so I didn't have that much to do directly with Plymouth. And Waterville, Maine is not that large. I mean, it is larger than Plymouth, but it's not huge. I had lived in a large city before that because I did graduate work in Chicago. And so I was used to what a really large city was like. And Waterville isn't that for sure.
I assume they probably rolled up the streets at Sunset in Waterville, just like in Plymouth.
Yep. To a certain extent, yes.
Right. So when did you finish up at Plymouth then?
Let's see. Fall of 2007.
Okay, so you were here for a goodly long time. And having known you in the science department, I know that you had quite a few initiatives that we did in the science department, and one was the meteorology, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about, starting the meteorology program and some of the things that happened, and how did Plymouth get into that business, and what were some of the problems that we had?
Well, basically the Board of Trustees at that time was pushing for people to develop new programs. The Board of Trustees goes back and forth in that. Sometimes they want lots of new programs and sometimes they want consolidation. But at that time they were looking for new programs. And it had been suggested to me that we should try an environmental science program. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense. There was one at Keene already, and that, although it seemed like a popular type thing, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then it was also suggested we start a geology program, but UNH had a fine geology program, and this would simply be a duplicate for a different student population for sure. But it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And my graduate training was mostly in atmospheric science, atmospheric physics to be more exact. And so it seemed to me that we could do that. And so we first put together a generalized program in, I forget the name of it now, but it was one where both chemistry and atmospheric science could reside. And the reason for that was it was concern about us having a bachelor's degree in a specific discipline. And so we had this program of I forget what it was called, as I said, some kind of a generalized bachelor's degree in physical sciences with options in chemistry and options in atmospheric science. And the atmospheric science went well for a couple of years, and so we then said, well, let's get a straight degree, and so we put it as a bachelor's in atmospheric science, which has since then converted over to be called meteorology, which is a much more popular term.
Right. A lot of people wouldn't understand what atmospheric science is,
right,
but they know what the weatherman does. So you were in a natural science department. How did you find that to be when you first came here? Because we had biologists and chemists, and you were really the only physicist, right?
Yeah, I was the only physicist. And well, I enjoyed it. For the most part, I mean, every department has its own problems, but the graduate program that I was in was an interdisciplinary program. And so getting into a department that was rather well, it wasn't really interdisciplinary, it was just a combination.
All the disciplines in it.
Yeah, just all piled together. So that was fine, and I didn't have any problems working with people in other fields. That was not a challenge. I enjoyed that, actually.
Now, one of the questions that we often ask people is, was there anybody that sort of mentored you during the first 5 or 6 years that you were here? Or that you could, that on campus that sort of took you under his or her wing to integrate you into the community?
Well, sort of, yeah. When I came, the president had established a Big Brother program, and Dave Switzer was my big brother.
Oh, okay.
So Dave sort of took on that role, although not happily. He felt very awkward in that
In
situation.
terms of being a historian, talking to somebody that was a physicist, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, he felt that, yes, he had been here for a while, but he just wasn't real comfortable with the whole Big Brother thing. He thought it was a little childish. And just to tease him at times, when I would run into him, I'd call him Big Brother, and he just turned red and laughed. But, so that happened. As far as being integrated into the college and the science department, you were my mentor for that.
Okay. So, and being that you've been here for so long, you've been through, lots of different presidents. What's your impression of some of the roles that the presidents that played in the college? You came in under Harold Hyde, right?
Yes.
And how did that compare to other presidents that you were under?
Well, it was very different. Hyde was not an academic. He was a bureaucrat, and other presidents that came after him were much more like academic people. And Harold also liked a lot of stability. And so when I was interviewing, he was telling me how proud he was that the campus had not done anything after the Kent State affair. And I had to tiptoe carefully around that because I was the faculty member at Colby who made the motion for us to close down normal operations. And I couldn't say that to him. That would not have gone over well.
Right. Well, probably the first one after Hyde was Cass Marking,
Yeah.
And how supportive was he? When did the atmospheric science program begin? Probably after you've been here for a while, right?
Yeah, I think it was when Cass was president.
Okay.
And Cass was a good fellow. He was a real humanist, and he appreciated academics. And that was a real change.
It always seems strange to me too that when we got rid of a president, they went down to Durham and became the university system president.
Yep, that's true.
So, how did your impression of students change over the time that you were here? You started out teaching just strictly physics, and then you went into sort of meteorology.
Yep.
And then at another point, you moved over to computer science.
Yeah, I taught them various general science courses. I did teach meteorology. I taught geology also. And as I said, I did my PhD in the Department of Geophysical Sciences, so we all got exposed to a little bit of solid earth, fluid earth, et cetera. So.
And what was sort of the event or the idea to move over and to move into computer science from?
Oh, that was Cass Marking's idea.
Okay, and what was his reasoning behind that?
Well, I think it was marketing. Everybody had to have a computer science program, and he had 2 different people who tried to start it, and neither were successful at it. And I was doing a lot of numerical modeling at the time. Wasn't doing as much here because we didn't have the computing power, but
Right.
I just finished a sabbatical out at NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and was doing big modeling type stuff out there. So he thought I was a computer scientist, and he asked me if I would, he said, you've got a meteorology program successfully started, how about starting a computer science program? And my first response was no. And he said, why not? I said, I'm not a computer scientist, I'm a physicist who does a lot of programming and
Right.
builds models and simulations. And I thought about it for a while, talked quite a bit with Bill Taylor about it, and eventually I came to the decision, you know, looking at my own career and how things were going at Plymouth, it would make sense to get into a computer science program. I realized that Plymouth was never going to really support physics, but there was support for computer science. And so that was kind of nice. And at first, they were looking just for a program without a degree, but with courses. And, you know, very quickly we realized, no, we need a degree program. And Cass was very supportive of that.
Helpful to be able to do that.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned Bill Taylor, you know, Bill was a historian, Dave was a historian. What did you see as relationships amongst the faculty back in the 80s in terms of disciplines and in terms of, I guess you could say, faculty governance, that kind of thing?
Well, faculty got along reasonably well in spite of academic discipline differences. People respected each other, and I guess when I came here, one of the first big things that I noticed, as you started in the introduction, that I was an assistant professor in the science department, maybe I said, nobody thought of themselves as a professor of X, Y, or Z. I was not a professor of physics. I was a professor in the science department, and in the social sciences, it was the same thing. People were not professors of history. They were professors of social science, or faculty members in social science, and that was a big shift. And one of the things I noticed over the years, gradually, the administration started accepting the fact that many of us had respect for our academic disciplines that we came from, and we're not just generalized professors. We were, you know, eventually I got the title of professor of physics, but at the beginning it wasn't that way at all. It was, you know, science was just this one big generalized thing, and social sciences were the same way. Bill Taylor complained a lot about, you know, history being lumped into the social sciences. He didn't see it that way. He thought history was part of the humanities. And being in the social sciences department, it kind of misconstrued the whole thing. But
Well, I know when I came, I was essentially the first person in the natural science department with a PhD. And I thought of myself as a scientist and not as an instructor. It was interesting with Bob Fry. Bob Fry thought of himself as just someone that happened, his job was to teach conservation, and that was it. So did you ever get that same sense?
Definitely. The sense I got was people felt they were instructors and they just happened to be assigned to this particular set of courses, but they didn't think of themselves as a chemist or a biologist. And that shifted over the years, which was good.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you had taken a sabbatical at NCAR. What other kind of sabbaticals did you have during your time at Plymouth, and how did they relate to your, you know, you being a faculty person at Plymouth?
Well, I had two others, and they were both 6-month sabbaticals.
Okay, so half years.
Yeah. But what I was able to do was convince the dean, and I think it was Theo who was dean at the time. Now that job has turned into what they call provost, but
Right.
I suggested to her, they were always trying to get people to do half-year sabbaticals, and for financial reasons. And not having a lot of success, most people were taking full years. And I convinced Theo that if they let people do a half year every 3.5 years instead of a full year every 7, there would be more people taking them up on that. And so I had more sabbaticals than I didn't just do every 7th years,
Right,
every
right.
3.5 years. And then we had a change in administration that was removed. But one semester, this was after I was in the computer science department, I had 2 of these sabbaticals. There was a beginning course in computer science that I was developing, and I wanted to do a section on robotics using Legos. And so I spent the semester basically working on that project, coming up with good labs and that sort of thing. And another semester I went to Ecuador, and taught at the Catholic University of Ecuador in the engineering department. That was where computer science was at that time, in the engineering department. And that was interesting because it was just a totally different student culture.
You know, I think you're right. You always go, you know, if you stay someplace for so long, you never have an idea that there are other things out there in the world, you know. And
Right.
I felt sorry for a lot of my other faculty in the natural science that never took a sabbatical, you know.
Yep.
How can they see what the rest of the world is like?
Well, a sabbatical can be just a vacation or it can be a growth experience. And I found the three that I had were real growth experiences.
Right.
I mean, in Ecuador, I taught a full load. I thought I was going down there to teach part-time. When I got there, they had a new computer science program, and they didn't have faculty to teach the upper-level courses. So I thought I'd be teaching an introductory course and maybe an upper-level course. No, I was given 2 upper-level courses each term. And I was basically the only faculty member teaching the upper-level courses.
Sort of sink or swim kind of situation.
It was fun. It was a challenge, because I taught in Spanish,
Okay.
and that I had learned Spanish with the intention of being able to spend some time in Latin America, and teaching in it is different. I mean,
Right.
you know, because you can't plan out everything you're going to say. You think about what you're going to cover in class, and think about what words you might or might not know, and make sure you pick those up. But other than that, you've got to just talk naturally like we're doing now.
Right.
It's just, so that's an extra complication. I was very fortunate that one of the students in my class, a very bright fellow, who's working for Oracle right now in the US, his uncle was working for Oracle in Oregon, and he had spent a year with his uncle,
So you knew
sort of
English
as an
pretty
exchange
well,
student, so he knew English quite well. So when I would get stuck at all, he would feed me words.
That's good.
Yeah, it made it very nice.
Now,
And-
what kind of role did you play? You know, we've talked a little bit about the fact that you're in natural science and then computer science, and sort of started out the program there. What kind of role did you play in the general, shall we say, faculty governance at Plymouth?
Well, a couple of different things. I was involved in things like the writing across the curriculum effort.
Okay.
And I was on the planning committee for quite a while, college planning.
That was back when actually faculty got to make some decisions with respect to planning.
And that was not a good experience, frankly, because people didn't want to be realistic. I was suggesting that based on the demographics that we were hearing, that enrollments were going to go downhill. And so we should have a backup plan for what happens if enrollments start to drop. And that was thoroughly rejected by the administration. They said, no, we should be thinking positively. And I said, that is thinking positively. But if you can't ignore the fact that there has to be an alternate plan if things aren't the way they are right now. So that didn't get very far, but that was.
Well, unfortunately, your prognosis is true, because the last 3 years, we've been in problems in terms of declining enrollments.
Right. Well, you know, when people look at the number of people going into kindergarten or first grade, you can predict roughly how many are going to come out of college. And as long as the percentage of college students coming out stays reasonably the same, you can predict how many students are going to be coming. So, you know, it's not rocket science.
Right.
But people always wanted to think positively, and so that was considered negative thinking, and that's why it got rejected. Wasn't the idea was bad, it was negative thinking,
Right,
supposedly.
Right. Now, you've been here for a long time. When you came, we had, the junior high and high school on campus, and,
That had
been moved out by that time?
That had been moved
Okay.
out by that time,
But we
yes.
still have the roads going through campus and what have
Oh,
you.
yeah.
So what's your thoughts about how the campus is today as compared to when you came?
Well, it's much more attractive. The roads going through campus were not a positive aspect of it. So, you know, the planner who closed down those roads and made it a walking campus, I think did us a good turn.
Right.
The only thing I would say is that they did not solve the parking problem. As I drove in this morning and looking for parking places, I realized, you know, the parking problem still exists,
Right, right.
and probably always will.
And, you know, again, one of the ideas that I propose is that freshmen, sophomores, and juniors should have cars on campus, and that went over like a lead balloon.
Oh, yeah.
So, what have you seen, during the time you were at Plymouth, as some of the major transformations that we've undergone?
Well, to me, the biggest
You think
one,
have been positive and maybe have also been negative?
thing to me that was the biggest one that I've seen that was positive was the whole notion that people did have academic disciplines and weren't just a generalized group of teachers assigned to certain courses. And that was a big shift, frankly. Because when we first tried to bring the atmospheric science program as a degree program, we got a lot of grief. People said, oh no, that's too technical for Plymouth. And it took a while for that notion to settle out, that something technical shouldn't be at Plymouth. So that whole shift from, with people recognizing that there were academic disciplines and most of the faculty felt strongly toward a discipline, didn't mean they were in a stovepipe. You know, they still cooperated together, but they also had their own definite point of view and academic interest. And that was a big shift. And I think that made for a big shift in the students too. The biggest negative thing that I saw is, as when I first came, everybody knew everybody else. I mean, not close friends, but we all knew who the other person was. And I found that by the time I was getting ready to retire, that had been lost, and it was much more bureaucratic. People who had rules or procedures, and that's what you had to follow, regardless of whether it made sense or not. Yeah, right. Making sense and working were not good criteria. It was whether or not that was the rule. And I got into a couple of very difficult situations with that when I was in computer science. Because most of the years I was there, which were about 25, I was department head. So I got those kinds of, I was the one getting all those kinds of problems to solve. And I know one time we had a student who had graduated from Plymouth as a music education major and didn't have a good success in finding jobs. Her husband was a computer science major in our department, and she sort of liked what he was doing, so she wanted to get into our department and get a degree in computer science. And she was told, it was a time that enrollments were tough. She was told, no, she couldn't do that. I mean, she could get into the department, but she could not get a degree in computer science. And the reason was it was a Bachelor of Science degree, and she already had a Bachelor of Science degree.
And a catch-22 kind of situation.
Yeah, and it was impossible to convince, at first, the powers that be that, you know, a Bachelor of Science in music education and a Bachelor of Science in computer science are not the same degree. And boy, that was a tough uphill battle. We finally won.
Well, I know you and I served on the Council of Chairs one year. I can remember you and I wanted to have a proposal where our adjunct faculty could go down to the gymnasium and also buy into medical benefits, and I think you remember we didn't make much progress on that, and you tried to convince the people in Bean that, look, let these guys buy their medical benefits. They would do that, you know. Well, only the sick ones will do that, you know. And I was so frustrated, you know, that way.
The thing was that it was the attitude toward part-time faculty that they were just warm bodies to work. They didn't treat them as professionals.
Right.
And
which is a shame, you know.
it is, because many of those people had every bit as much professional competence as full-time faculty. It's just luck of the draw, they didn't have a full-time position. And that really galled me.
Now, you mentioned that you were involved in writing across the curriculum. I guess I would say in my time that I've been here, two of the big things that have been added to the curriculum is writing across the curriculum. The other was the change or transformation in the general education program. So what are your thoughts on when we adopted sort of instead of a cafeteria kind of program to a more holistic general ed program?
Well, I thought that made sense. some of the things I've been hearing about recently don't make as much sense, but, yeah, I thought trying to get students the notion that general education is actually a valuable thing and not just a series of requirements to get through. And that shift was starting to take place, which was good.
Right. Now, tell us a little bit more about sort of relationship with some of the students that you've had. I know that you've gotten in contact with some of them. What kind of progress have they made, that you know about?
Well, some of them have gotten, I haven't had any that I know that went to grad school.
Okay.
Well, yes, one. When we first started the atmospheric science program, a fellow named Bill Keneally
Right, Bill, I remember Bill.
came through, and then he went to work for the Weather Channel, and he was the face behind all the severe storms. So anytime you saw, a hurricane coming in, you'd see Keneally there, right in the middle of it, being videoed. And he did some graduate work in Florida. But other than that, very few students that I know have gone to graduate school. Some of them have gone into very good industrial positions, surprisingly good. I had one student who got a job at Bell Labs, and when she went down to interview, the interviewer told her he didn't know why she was there interviewing because they didn't hire people from schools like Plymouth State.
Well, that's kind of a put down.
Yeah, he was blunt about it. And he asked, how did you get here? Because we don't interview people from schools like yours. And she said, well, my aunt works here.
Oh,
And-
okay.
And he said, oh, okay, that's how you got the interview. And then they got talking about what she studied in computer science. It turns out that the textbook we had used for computer architecture was the same one he had used for computer architecture. So they spent the rest of the interview commiserating about how difficult the problem sets were. And, that put them on a very even keel, and she got hired and did quite well at Bell Labs. Once the guy who was doing the hiring realized, okay, this person's been through the same kind of stuff I have.
Right.
And I had one very good experience. I taught the writing course in the computer science department as part of the computer architecture course, and had a lot of flack from some students who just thought this was a terrible idea. And I had a couple of very good students, one of whom sort of resisted. I mean, he had to get dragged through the whole thing. But he was a very, very bright kid, and he went to work, I'm trying to remember which company. It was a big software company he went to work for. And, I used to tell him, look, writing is going to be useful to you in your professional career. And he was 4 or 5 years out, and he had gotten promoted to a managerial level, running a software team. And he wrote me a letter. He said, that writing stuff is really the most important thing in my current job. He said, because I'm constantly writing proposals and reports. He said, so writing is far more important than I ever thought it would be. That was kind of heartwarming to hear that.
Well, we find that also, we make our bio majors do bio seminar where they give a 15-minute presentation. And they all sort of hate that. They say, why do I have to do this? And of course, as a person out in public, if they go for work for DES or something like that, they often have to give public presentations,
Yep.
And it's sort of the question, well, how much of the curriculum should be directed by students that don't know a damn thing? And how much should be directed by the faculty that have had the experience, and that's sort of always a paradox,
It's kind of a blend of the two.
Right.
Each has some knowledge that they can bring to it. And you gotta blend the two.
Right. We haven't talked about it, but I think an interesting thing that happened was when Plymouth had the chance to take over the meteorology program at Belknap College. I don't know if you were involved in that a little bit. Can you mention a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, I could. The original, when we first got started with the atmospheric science program, Belknap was in the process of collapsing. They had a good meteorology program, but most of the rest of the college was weak, and they couldn't stay in business any longer. They were collapsing. And I got to know Bob Derrickson, who was one of the faculty members over at Belknap, and he and I'll use the word, we sat and plotted what we could do, and so Bob and I worked together on the atmospheric science project, and then we tried to get Belknap to come over, and there were a bunch of logistical things that blocked it. Well, there was one academic issue. They objected strongly, some of the students over there objected strongly to having to take physics courses
Oh.
or advanced mathematics courses. They just wanted to do weather forecasting, and it was hard to convince them, no, meteorology is more than just weather forecasting.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
that's part of it, but there's a lot more to be studied, and they didn't like that. There was also, if I remember correctly, they had a fire truck, and they had a volunteer fire department based in the college that did a lot of the firefighting for Center Harbor. And they wanted to be the
Yeah,
fire
we do
department
that,
for
right.
Plymouth, and that wasn't cutting it at all.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so that was one of their disappointments. And then the Belknap, as it was breaking up, the faculty got positions in other places. And Bill Hovey, who was probably one of the lead faculty members, in fact, he may have been head of their meteorology program, he went up to Linden State and got an offer up there and dragged the students with him.
I always had the understanding too that Harold Hyde was not very positive about that.
No, we did not get administrative support for that kind of thing.
It would have been sort of almost like pulling in a program already pre-made without having to go through the birth pangs of that.
Well, one of the things at that time, Plymouth State was very much a top-down institution. And any idea that was good was an idea that came from the central administration. And anything that bubbled up from faculty got discouraged, let's put it that way.
Well, I don't know if you, and I know my memory is not quite right, but, and I know he didn't actually say this, but I can remember one faculty meeting, Harold insinuated it was his football and we would play by his rules. And the faculty wanted to do something, and he said, no, it's my football, we'll play by my rules. And then we went ahead and did it anyway, so.
Yeah, well, he definitely felt that way, there was no question. And faculty meeting at that time was a joke. It was basically the faculty were required to gather in a big room where he would tell them what he wanted to tell them. And faculty did not talk about issues. We didn't debate issues or try to think through issues. It was a matter of being gathered together to be told by the president what we were to think.
Right. So we've been talking for about a half an hour or so. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think, would be important? That, what do you think, for example, what do you think the strengths of the university, Plymouth State is today as compared to what it was when you came?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that people recognize that there are academic disciplines in the world, and it's not just all a generalized mush of post-secondary studying. To me, that was the biggest thing. I know a fellow in the history department who had been in the administration, and a very good historian, and he was sitting in his office one afternoon, this is when he was in the administration, and he was reading a book, a history book, and the president walked by and said, what are you doing? He said, I'm reading this book on American history, and he was told, I don't pay you to read books. So that was the kind of attitude that existed at that time. And
well, I don't know if you ever had the impression, but I had the impression often, going around the state, and they said, oh, you've got a science program at Plymouth? Oh, yes, not only that, we have a biology degree at Plymouth, and there were people, oh, I thought only Durham did that stuff, so it's.
yeah, I used to run into some of that with the atmospheric science meteorology program. How do you possibly have that at Plymouth State? Well, you get a little bit of administrative support, then you hire the right people and put together a team that can put together a good program, and that was successful.
Right.
And it was the right move to go because there was nobody else in the state looking at doing a meteorology program, so it was a niche that we could definitely fit into, and it was possible to hire faculty.
To be able to staff the program.
Yeah, and we didn't need to hire more people for environmental studies or for geology, in my mind. And I think that turned out to be pretty much correct, that the meteorology was the right direction to go because the program evolved into a very fine program that anyone could be proud of having. And, I mean, it's not huge compared to something like Penn State, which,
Right, but still.
I mean, you have meteorology students coming out your ears down, a school
Right.
like that. But still, for a smaller school, it was a very credible, solid, respectable program, which I took a lot of pride in the fact that I was involved in getting that started. Whereas Bob Derrickson and I did it as a team, really. And then we eventually hired Bob. But he and I were putting it together before he was hired. But we couldn't put together a program with just me teaching courses. We had a couple
You need
people.
to have more than one person in a.
Yeah, and Bob's interest in meteorology fit very compatibly with mine. I mean, what I like to do and what he liked to do kind of fit together to make a whole. And he and I got along real well. He was a very fine gentleman to work with. And
I still
So-
occasionally get to see him and, well, I thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to do this with us, and I appreciate your perspective on what it's been like to be a faculty member at Plymouth, and I wish you well for the future.
well, thank you.